Hello, I'm Sasan Kesravi. This is Proteus Debate Academy, and with me are Kaden and Danush from Rock Hill. Say hello.
Danush, you want to go first?
Yeah, hello, I'm Danush.
Hi, I'm Kaden.
I just had so many flashbacks to teaching on Zoom. Was just like, right, you don't have you have to figure out whose turn it is to speak. You guys have been debating for 4 years at Rock Hill, and
Yeah.
have a lot of accolades to your name. Most recently, yesterday, Danush. So why don't you each, starting with Danush, if it's different from each other, you can tell me a little bit about your sort of debate accolades and what events you did, and relatively how those went.
I guess I'll start with the stuff that I did with Kaden because that's the most impressive. I won the public school state championship in Texas, which is called the UIL state championship with Kaden in policy debate. We got second our sophomore year, and then we won our junior year, which was the pre like last year. And then this year or last year as well in the summer at NSDA Nationals, we got fourth place, which I guess is the most impressive thing on paper. And then we also made it to, I think, quarterfinals of the TFA state tournament, which is a different Texas state tournament. As for myself individually, I did pretty much everything. But I guess one of the important things is like I did extemporaneous speaking too, and I made it to elims at the night talk, which is like the speech TOC. So yeah, I've been pretty much all over the place, but that's pretty much it. And then I guess yesterday was my last debate round at the Reagan tournament, and I made the semis there. So that was interesting and that was nice to end off my career on like a good note.
Yeah, Caden, what about we heard
Yeah.
some of the stuff you do together. Anything on your end or anything you want to add that you've done together?
I mean, most of the most impressive stuff is like Danush said, the things that we did together, back with mostly policy debate. We started out in public forum before we really transitioned there. But then policy debate is really where we found a home and ended up being most successful. And then, since I've graduated, I'm 1 year older than Danush, so I've been at the University of Texas for 1 year now. Sort of transitioned out of like debate formats, and I now do mock trial through the American Mock Trial Association with UT. So been to a couple tournaments there, but that's sort of a whole different world out of debate now.
Yeah, you guys reached out to me, and one of the things that kind of stuck out about your initial message was the variety of debate events you've done. And, I think something that we tried to um, impress upon our viewers is that the sort of basic principles of these events, there's like little things, right? Like with like speaking roles, like second speaker in public forum is very different than like second speaker in parliamentary. But practically speaking, like what makes an argument good and like the functions of how argumentation works are kind of universal. And it's not often, especially in high school. It's more common in college that people do multiple events, but it's not that often that I speak to high schoolers who have done extemp and public forum and policy and also branched out into these sort of like auxiliary debate events like Ronald Reagan or whatever. Um, I'm going to be curious later to hear about your perspective on arguments and stuff like that coming from that background. But first, I'm curious just how all of that got started. So, how did, I guess, Caden, you went to your year older, so you started debating a year earlier as well?
I did start debate a year earlier. So, we've got a club at Rock Hill High School, which is essentially how all of our different events are run. It's all sort of one group of kids that meets after school from like, 4 to 6. And I started out my freshman year. I did not attend a single tournament. So I was like in the club, not doing anything. Came in like very nervous kind of kid, not the kind of person who spoke, typical story there. But I met Danush in my sophomore year, and I still didn't debate with him then. I went to a couple tournaments, was still pretty awful. I think between my entire freshman and sophomore year, out of like 18 rounds, I think I never won one. Uh, then met Danush in my junior year, and we started debating together. And that's when we started doing public forum at first. We initially started going to some tournaments, started realizing like, wow, now that we're together, we can prep together, started, winning some things. And we were immediately like, we want to go to the TOC. Like we loved watching videos, like Proteus videos, anything on the internet that we could get our hands on that was like, wow, look at what they're doing, look what they're doing. And we're like, we want to be like them. We want to go to the TOC. So we started, trying to get our school to send us there and stuff, and that was a whole issue that we can maybe talk about, but that was really the path we went on.
So talk to me about what the club looks like. So this is a club that doesn't have a formal coach. There isn't like a teacher who is like the coach.
Maybe Danush can explain that one. Tell them about how the coaching works.
Yeah, so I guess it's we go to a Texas public high school, so unlike other high schools, debate isn't like a main priority, I guess. But
Yeah.
we initially had a teacher who they teach other subjects too. Like for example, this teacher taught, I believe, economics along with debate. And then we have, fortunately, we have a debate class. So there's a class period you can take, and then during the school day, you work on debate things. So that person who was there initially, like my freshman year and 2 years, Caden's freshman year and Caden's sophomore year, because we're 1 year apart, as we said. He was actually pretty like great. Like he knew a lot about debate. He'd been coaching a lot. I think he even coached like the some of the national teams of other countries in like different
Mm.
events. So he was pretty like, well established, but he ended up leaving. And then this was pretty much like the bulk of our career was spent with someone who was much, much closer to like a volunteer who just kind of drove us around to tournaments, but he didn't really understand much about debate or like competitiveness, things like that. And he was sort of just like doing it because we needed someone to fill that role versus like someone who really had a passion for that concept.
Yeah, more of a chaperone and
Hmm.
maybe a mentor, but not so much like a like an academic coach, right?
Yeah.
So you said that you switched to public forum junior year. What were you doing leading up to that?
Just a spattering of tons of different stuff. I mean, extemp, I was trying like LD. I tried for one tournament that went pretty poorly. A bunch of different stuff. I'd done PF on my own a little bit, and it didn't go too well until really Danush and I got together and sort of, I would say, even though I was a year older, Danush had been more engrossed in film and like watching good debaters before meeting me. And I would say that Danush actually taught me how to do debate originally, despite being a year younger.
What do you think? So that dynamic seems like it made the difference. Was it anything about public forum as an event that do you think made debate click, or do you think you two got together, that's what clicked, and then public forum is just what you happen to be doing?
I think, at least personally for me, it really was us just getting together and we just happened to start out in public forum, and that was for a few reasons. I think we started out in PF, like I mentioned, Danush had been watching videos and stuff before that. A lot of that was like college policy that he had been
Right.
watching, and like we were watching like, uh, Tyler Vergo, and I'm forgetting big names of the time, but uh, we decided to pursue PF because we thought, and we really continued to think this throughout our career, that policy was going to be too difficult for us in the position we were in. And we thought that because PF was less of an evidentiary requirement, less of a prep requirement compared to deep like policy back files, that we would pursue PF and be able to be more successful there and just overwhelmingly develop speaking skills rather than the massive prep element that came in with policy.
I want to hear about that in just a second, but Danush, so how did your interest in debate start? Because it sounds like um, maybe you were already doing some stuff before you started working with Kaden, but it's interesting to hear that you kind of had this. Not a lot of people watch like college policy rounds, right? So how did your interest in debate start, and how'd you end up on the team and up to the point in the story that we're at?
So like I guess in middle school, I was pretty much doing everything. So like I was playing chess, math, science, and the governing body for like all those things is the same people that do debates, like called UIL, which is what I mentioned previously. So
Hmm.
in we didn't have debate back then in middle school, but we did have like speaking events, so to speak. So I did like impromptu speaking in middle school. And like I think generally like the reason why I gravitated towards debate is that like I never really had a fear of like public speaking in general. Like I'm not a particularly outgoing person, but at least like that public speaking aspect wasn't that difficult. So in freshman year, I was like, I really want to be on the debate team. So excuse me. So like the first meeting or practice, or even I think before school started, they invited us like a week early to look at all the clubs, and that was the club I really wanted to join. So freshman year, I was doing debate, learning about debate. I think I went to 2 or 3 tournaments, and those were both in policy debate. But generally, that year was like the Zoom debate era, so it
Yeah.
wasn't like super easy to get to tournaments or like join a lot of them. And then sophomore year, I was like, basically I was doing policy debate, and the funny thing is my partners kept quitting on me. So I went through like a bunch of partners, right? And they were all just like, this sucks. Like people are speaking too fast. They're too loud. I don't like getting screamed at. I was like, yeah, it does kind of suck, right? And then so then sophomore year, I was like, okay, I hate this partner stuff. Let's like do an event where it's only me, right? So I did LD and I did okay in that. And then the coach at the time was like, you and Kaden should debate together. And I didn't really know. I was like, who is this guy? Like he's kind of just 18 rounds, 18 losses. Like, are we serious, right? So
Yeah.
then eventually we started debating together, and I guess that's pretty much where the story started. And I think as for the PF stuff, yeah, I was watching a lot of college policy at the time just because I wanted to watch all types of debate because debate was just really interesting. Like I'm pretty much obsessed with debate. So I guess I was also watching Proteus videos too. It wasn't like just college policy. So I was watching like the Sasan like round analysis stuff, and that was like the most interesting. A funny thing is like from the beginning, like the reason I like those videos so much was like you were like super obsessed with cross-X that like nobody else cared about, right? And like that was the interesting part because I think when like people who don't understand debate, and I was like very new at the time, when they watch a debate, cross-X is the most interesting part. But then like as teachers and as coaches, nobody cares. Like they're just like ask like questions if you feel like it. And then some of these new like college graduates are like on their phone scrolling TikTok while you're during cross, and you're like, why aren't you listening to this part of the debate? So that was really nice, and that's like kind of what I remember from Proteus in the beginning. Like, what was the
Well,
what stood out
that's
to me?
that's funny because I guess I hadn't heard from someone that I focus on that more than anybody else, right? But I think you're right, and I think it's an under focused on aspect of the debate. I agree that on paper, right, it doesn't like the way we think about debate decisions, it doesn't have any impact on the winner. But one of the most common like complaints people make about a judge is that oh they only listen to cross-X, which is just like
Hmm.
so then win there, right? So then win the cross-X.
Yeah.
And thank you. That's very flattering and kind of you guys to say. I'm curious about a couple things. One, you mentioned UIL. So my interpretation of that initially was that okay, this is like the Texas State Championships of the local speech and debate league. But you said they also are the governing body for like a bunch of other things like chess?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I guess
So
you
you
can go
go
ahead.
to one building on some day in May, and in one corner kids are playing chess, and in another corner kids are doing impromptu speeches.
Not exactly. So it's basically the governing body of everything to do with any competition between schools in
Got it. But
Texas.
they're
So
not
like
happening in the
football is
same.
done through UIL,
I
right?
see.
Yeah, the tournament that we went to twice and won once was basically hosted at the University of Texas, where it was just one weekend. Policy teams show up there that have qualified and stay there, and there's tons of these different tournaments all over the place all the time.
It's hard to gauge these things as a student, but I'm
Hmm.
curious whether you feel that most of the debate leagues that I've sort of been a part of have just been this insular sort of debate thing. And we talk about debate's role in the overall education system in this sort of abstract way. I'm curious whether, like, your experience being in a league that was run by a an organization that does do other educational stuff, right? They monitor other extracurriculars and they kind of have that perspective on what the role of debate should be. How do you feel like that sort of organizational structure affects their priorities around what debate looks like?
Hmm. Do you want to do that one? Or at
Um,
least first? Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the main thing is like at least the style of debate that they really prioritized was one, they didn't have all the events, right? So the events that they had were like congressional debate, policy debate, Lincoln Douglas debate, and extemporaneous speaking. And that was pretty much it. So like they weren't like allowing for all types of debate. I just think because those are the ones that were like much more like I guess traditional or they knew about them before. They weren't really looking
Right.
to expand. And then two is like the style of debate that was prioritized at these tournaments was very, very unique, right? Or unique nowadays, but it was the kind of like good old days, like debate when debate used to be like audience focused and things like that. So it was much slower speaking. The judges were usually from like so there's like a divisions, I guess, in high school sports and high school anything. And this is how it worked for debate as well. So there's like divisions between 1A to 6A based on size. And so at the state tournament, the 1A, 2A, and 3A judges, which are from the 1A and 2A, 3A schools, like they're usually their debate coaches, they were judging the larger divisions. And these folks are from really, really small areas where debate looks very different. So having to sort of adapt to that style was also interesting. But like just from an organizational perspective, I think that it's a little bit less it's a little bit less unified than I guess you're imagining it. It's like we kind of have like people that are in charge of debate, like they're the UIL debate people. There's also the UIL science people, UIL math people.
Hmm.
But the state tournaments are held around the same places around the same time, but they're not held on the exact same day. So yeah.
But people are sort of accountable for what the debate thing is producing to an
Hmm.
overall organization, which sounds like it would lead to some of the more like traditional. Kaden, yeah, I wondered if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
Yeah. When we talk about UIL debate, you can imagine that as like synonymous to traditional lay policy debate. And that's why I think Danush and I tended to, at least at first, because that first run was in my junior year, his sophomore year, we had been doing PF all year, right? We were used to doing PF speaking focused debate, and that was what UIL policy was, is it was just taking most PF skills, bringing it over to a policy format. And that's really what they encourage as like an organization is, when they're talking to everybody before all the tournament starts and everything, they're like, we focus on this kind of debate. We want judges to evaluate your speaking skills and stuff first. And like, they don't handle evidentiary issues. Like most judges don't want an email chain. Most judges don't want a doc. And for some people that can annoy you, right? If you're very used to a traditional sort of, not traditional, a more progressive policy debate format, kids come into that and are like, what? But these judges don't want to see my evidence. What does it mean? And I think me and Danush just got used to it. And we just decided like we're going to fully embrace these judges don't want to see my evidence. They don't care. So we're going to focus on the sort of PF forward speaking style policy debate. And we learned how to do that, at least at first.
What's funny is, I go to these, and Kaden, I don't know if you've been judging at all at tournaments since you've been out, but when you go to these tournaments, there's the judges lounge, and you're hanging out for 3 days and eating bagels with these people who are like either first year outs or this like man or woman who's in their 60s or 70s who's been doing this forever. And you
Hmm.
kind of just like talk to people and having had so many conversations with people from this sort of background that you're describing with these sorts of values around debate, it makes sense that they have policy, Congress, and LD because to them it's like, all right, well, we have a 2-on-2, we have a 1-on-1, and we have like a free for all. And
Hmm.
like the distinctions between like how policy is different from public forum are kind of irrelevant when it's like the evidence aspects of it aren't really that like important. And do they do their own topics?
No, they
You
run on
use
the
like
same
the
topic.
topic
Yeah.
of the. That's interesting. So
Well,
you're
at
because
least for
like for example like the Catholic Forensics League. I don't know if you're familiar.
Hmm.
Are also like a traditional leaning organization, but they do their own topics. So there's people who just like pretty much just do CFL style, like these 1A, 2A. I'm guessing these are like the smaller
The
schools.
smaller schools, yeah.
So a lot of those smaller schools will only do these tournaments that are aimed at this sort of like CFL, especially because they only get to travel out like to three things a year, right? So,
Yeah.
what was your interaction with the larger sort of national circuit while you were doing this? So you kind of explained going into the more traditional debate format. Were you also in these sort of like fast progressive KE spready policy rounds?
Yeah, we really started out, I would say, because like Danush mentioned, we'd been watching college policy since the start, since before we started doing traditional debate formats. So we were always aware, and even especially in the early days, we were sort of like gung ho to experiment with some things. Like when we'd be in a PF round and we'd have like, oh, we have a policy judge this round because we didn't fully know what that meant at the time. They were like the layest policy judge. They had no idea how to evaluate, a technical debate, but
Yeah.
we said they had the word K in their paradigm. So we would like get crazy. I remember one time we like slapped together this security K argument on some PF topic and read it in the finals of a local tournament. So we were always aware of sort of K debate and sort of getting into this, but then we really transitioned after that first year when we'd been doing, went to the UIL tournament and everything. And the next year, my senior year, Danush's junior year, we really started reading K arguments. I mean, I would say that we were a critical team, and I can explain sort of why we made that choice for us because we thought it was much better for us in sort of our prep situation as a smaller school. If we wanted to compete in policy, we decided we need to take this avenue because I think it's less focused on recent evidence, right? We weren't going to cut politics updates. We just couldn't handle it the same way some larger schools could. So we really did pursue that, and that was the bulk of our career on both sides.
Yeah, well, talk to me about that, either one of you, because this is something that you referenced earlier, this idea of the prep burden of doing policy and kind of how you thought it was going to be very prohibitive. Um, I guess just first start out by like talking about the policy scene in general and why you had that impression and sort of like what the because a lot of people who watch the channel don't do policy and they might only be familiar with something like PF, right? And it's a very different prep burden. And so I'm curious from like the transition, but also just how you would describe what the sort of um workload of being a serious trying to be a serious competitor in policy. What does that prep burden look like?
I can take this one, Danush. Do you want to?
I can also just talk about like why we switched in the first place. I think that's also
Yeah.
valuable. So like I guess starting from PF and like comparing and contrasting, the main thing is like the judging, right? So like at least when we were doing PF, the reason why we started to, or I guess Caden was the main one, but he was getting really dissatisfied with the type of feedback we're receiving after rounds, right? So regardless of whether we win or lose, we just felt like the kinds of judges in those debates were not the judges that sort of saw eye to eye with us in terms of what we looked at in terms of like what a debate is supposed to be or what's important in a debate. So then we started to sort of shift towards policy because it's an event where folks are seeking this objective truth in almost every single round. And that, at least on the national circuit, that's like the whole point. And I think that in other debate events, I think a good way to explain it to people who don't really do policy is like every other event, and sometimes PF is a little bit different nowadays. It's shifting towards this like progressive mindset. Congress, Extem, PF, they're like competitive events where persuasion is the focus, right? Persuading the judges of what you want to argue and persuading the judges about your worldview. But the interesting thing about policy is, and the reason why most folks in other events sort of make fun of it or don't understand it is because persuasion is not the focus of the debate, right? It is research. Who has researched the best? Who has the most evidence? Who's able to make the most objectively true arguments, and who's able to sort of go back and forth on that kind of sense. That's why judges have things like card docs. They read cards after the round for like sometimes 10 to 30 minutes trying to make a decision. So it's an event that's really different to the other events. And at the time, we were dissatisfied with what the other events were available to us looked like. So we switched to policy.
I think, and Kaden, I want to let you answer the initial question also. I hear what you're saying. I don't know that this is pushback on your answer, but it's something that I'm curious about your perspective on. Policy is the one that is the most focused on just the quality of the research and the facts of the issues. But it also has the worst social vibes and the most aggressiveness and yelling. And how do you reconcile that? Like, how does, because on paper, when you're describing something as being this sort of like dispassionate, not so much persuasion focused, a more evidentiary focused event, all of which is true of policy, you would expect it to not kind of have this sort of like heatedness to it. What do you think accounts for that, or do you think that reputation for for policy is like exaggerated?
I think it's 100% true.
Okay.
I think that you're very on point with that because I think the thing that differentiates it, the reason why, sort of this objective truth, we're all searching for who truly won this debate based on what the flow looks like. The kind of people who are willing to join policy and take it seriously to the extent they want to travel nationally and they want to do all this stuff, you have to be really intense about debate. Like that's as a ground level, if you want to do policy at that level, you have to have an intense personality. And then you commit so much to it, right? You're putting so much work into it, and people put a lot of work into other debate events, but I think those two things combined mean that when you get into a round with somebody in policy debate, they're going to be very intense. They're going to be very committed and convicted about how they feel and the fact that they should win. And, that means that when people do lose, like somebody has to lose every debate round, there's a lot of hard feelings and people are upset about it almost all the time. And I think that that's really what brings it to it is policy is just the ultimate extreme of commitment and not to say that other debaters aren't committed, but I guess it's this deep commitment to you've looked at your file so much that you've almost in your own mind convinced yourself that it's perfect and that the arguments that you're making are perfect, and you do tend to get upset when people don't see it the same way as you. I think as though it,
It,
yeah.
is any aspect of it like a part, like is any of it a part of how a policy debater benefits from performing? Do you know what I mean? Does it ever help people win around, and that's why they're sort of like either intentionally trained towards that or just sort of like that meta develops? Does that aggressiveness, like, is that productive? Because the way you're describing it is like,
Mhm.
okay, this is sort of just the outcome of these situations. But is there any part of the meta that you feel um, rewards that or encourages it, or it's just sort of like, no, these are really intense? People like academics like get into
Mhm.
really heated fights about biology and whether two fossils are the same dinosaur or not, right? And it's like this very like heated sort of thing. There's when Star Trek Into Darkness came out, there was a huge there's Wikipedia articles have like a talk page where the people who are editing can argue about the edits. And there's like a 100-page argument about whether the I in Into Darkness should be capitalized or not. And like so I'm trying to differentiate, right? Like, is it this sort of like, no, this is just people who are you require a certain amount of passion to be in this thing and obsession and this sort of character, and that's just sort of what happens when these people are in the room together on opposite sides, versus what I think is maybe the impression that some coaches who don't do policy get of it, which is that it rewards and incentivizes that sort of what I'll call social harshness.
Yeah,
I
I
guess
think that's absolutely totally true. I think that it's sort of cyclical in that way. Like people get drawn to it because it is that way. And I think that the mechanism within the event that really rewards that is like I think because it's less sort of persuasion focused, right? You're not like speaking like you would in extemp. You're sort of like making claims, and your claim must be true. So sort of when you're giving like the 2NR, I'm not like persuading the judge of something. I'm like because of how spreading and things are, I'm probably saying it very fast. I'm probably yelling it very loud. That just like claim X is true, warrant, they're wrong, move on. And it just becomes very dry and like people are drawn to it because it's dry. Judges, it's more clear when people do things that way. So they win, which means that people, this whole cycle continues on.
Danush, it seemed like you were
Mhm.
gonna say something also.
yeah, I think I have a bit of a different theory on why it sort of demands this kind of social characteristic. And I think the main reason is that people are not taught to communicate, and it's not important to learn how to communicate to others to be good at policy debate. So what I mean by this is like most of the policy debaters, at least on the national circuit, who are spreading and reading the critique, like me and Kaden, did not do any other events. They exclusively do policy debate, and their school has a long, long history of doing policy debate for many, many years, right? I think a good way to frame this is like if you think about the average amount of people in a single year in the entire United States that could walk into a high school policy debate round at the most progressive national circuit and understand what's going on and like gain a benefit from watching that debate, it's probably like a couple hundred people in the entire country, right? And I think that that's different than other events, and why like people don't learn how to communicate because they're in this kind of bubble where they only have to interact with these folks who already understand what's going on. And once they pick up on what's going on, they aren't concerned with like anything else. Also, I think that the judging is like this, right? So let's say I'm at a PF local, right? Or at some local tournament, and it's like some Asian dad who like worked 50 hours this week, and he just had to like run to this high school, and his son's like, please, can you just judge a couple debates? Like, please, like I really want you to. Like, this person doesn't care about what's going on in Yemen if that's the topic at the time, right? I have to convince this person to care, to listen, to do all these things. But in policy, it's like almost all the judges, when you start the debate, are rigorously flowing. They rigorously care. They're marking down every single issue because they know exactly that's how they think about debate. That's how they care about debate. So when you have this system where everybody already cares a lot, it benefits from this objective truth and just like rattling down points because people are not like, they're not at this point where parents are, where they don't really care and they're just like kind of waiting for you to make them care.
That raises two things that I want to talk about. The first that I'll start with is that there's this sort of like bit of common wisdom about debate events and how they work, and that's something that I've said before. It's something that Paul says a lot, and it's sort of like when policy debaters are criticized for not being able to be persuasive and communicate and stuff like that. The usual line that gets thrown out is that, you know, policy debaters can speak slower. Like if they have to, they can speak slower. And if they had to compete in, let's say, public forum, uh, well, okay, I think undeniably a great policy team will do better in public forum than a great public forum team
Mhm.
will do in policy. But I guess taking that second bit out, right? Like, do you think that like average, not average, but you know, but like national circuit level 3-3 and better, right? Like you're breaking, you know, um, those policy debaters in high school, do you feel that they have the skill set to um, do well in a debate event that in which they're not able to spread, in which they're not able to where they're more reliant on communication and persuasion? Do you feel like they still have that skill set and just don't need to use it for policy, or do you feel that they actually have a hard time with that skill set?
I really think it depends on the competitors. I think some people do have a better adaptation than others. I do think that you're correct broadly that like any national policy team would probably have an easier transition to other events because you're just sort of rigorously trained on like disad structure doesn't change no matter what event you're doing, right? Like even if I'm giving an accept speech, like the logic of links and impacts doesn't change. And being able to logically explain those, me and Danush have learned even in like lay events helps you, right? So I think that that baseline sort of argumentative structure and the way that policy goes about sort of teaching kids about how to structure arguments follows to everything else. And I don't think we rigorously teach those enough in other debate events. We sort of talk more about, you know, persuasion, and that's valuable in a lot of ways. And I think we teach that structure some other ways, but it's very rigorous in policy. And I think that's the biggest thing that allows kids to transition, even if they don't have sort of the speaking skills to allow them to be quote unquote as eloquent as people who tend to be in other events.
But do you feel like they would be just sort of at a loss for how to like win over a judge?
I don't think so, but I think that they would be more upset in so because decisions, right? And Danush and I have experienced this. Like we'd be in PF rounds and like the judge is like falling asleep on camera on Zoom. And judges at the end of the round will be like, "Oh yeah, this argument from the first neg speech that like has not made it to the last speech." They're like, "I really like that one, so I'm voting neg." Um, I think that the issue is policy debaters think that everyone understands the debate like they do because policy debate judges tend to be people who have come out of the policy debate community, and everyone sort of has the same mentality about how to evaluate things. And that doesn't exist as much in PF, LD, like non-progressive LD. So I think that it would upset them far more. And there is a skill to narrowing even judges who aren't paying attention to the issues in the way you are, narrowing their focus to help them see things the way that you are. And I think that there's a nuance to that that most policy debaters haven't had to develop.
Danush, it wanted to give you a chance to answer the question, but it also transitions to the second thing I wanted to talk about. So, uh, if you want to add more to sort of how you think, how well do you think policy debaters would do in another format, and whether they kind of truly lack that skill set, or if they just aren't really using it.
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is like a folklore kind of story, so don't quote me on this one, right? But in around 2006 or 2007, policy debater did enter the congressional tournament, like the national NSCA national tournament and congressional debate. And even though he had never done the event before, I'm pretty sure he ended up winning it, right? Don't quote me on the story. I've heard it from a couple of Congress debaters. It's been floating around. So that's like one
I,
thing.
I I've heard
Yeah.
similar folklore for college parley,
Mhm.
that like pretty good policy debaters like switched to parley and just crushed for the year. So yeah.
And then I think the second thing is like why I think policy debaters will do well is that the best policy debaters are really, really good at this persuasion aspect because they naturally pick up on it. But I think that maybe not the average policy debater is as good, but I think ultimately it doesn't matter because the thing that will separate them in these like events like congressional debate or extemporaneous debate is that they just know so much more about the world, right? The at least in the topics that they're debating, right? Like policy debate coaches like to talk about how in a year or a season, a policy debater will do like a master's thesis worth of research on that subject, right? So like it could be like water protection, which is what it was a couple of years ago, or it could be like fiscal redistribution, which is again another topic that we had. So when we get a topic that's even tangentially related to these subjects, a congressional or extemporaneous debater will just not have the ability to speak on that subject with enough nuance, or rather enough as much nuance as the policy debater. And I think that's what judges would appreciate. Like at least in the locals that I went to, and whenever I did extemp speaking, I'm not as eloquent as folks who've been doing extemp like hundreds of speeches throughout their life, right? But it didn't matter, and the reason why I was ranking highly is because the judges understood that like international relations, hegemony, these kinds of subjects, I just knew more about these things, and I was able to at least explain that versus like the whether or not I like put my hands up at the correct time or speaking at the correct pace. They kind
Right.
of excused me on those like little details.
And I'm sure like people's sort of willingness to do that will differ a little bit based on the circuit and the judge. But no, kind of going back to what we were talking about with policy judging, right? And how everyone is rigorously flowing and very interested in what's going on. There is this a bit of a phenomenon that um, exists in some formats of debate that I've been involved with in judging and stuff like that. And I think it's a little true in public forum. I think it's a little true in LD. I wonder what the situation in policy is, which is where you get, a lot of first year outs. And just statistically speaking, right? Like most debaters aren't in that top 20%.
Mm-hmm.
So you get a lot of people who then become judges, but now you're judging that top 20%. And people will want to make their decisions seem very sophisticated and very like rigorous and very correct. And I think there is this kind of unspoken fear of embarrassment for making like a bad or like a wrong decision. And I think that sometimes overcorrects, and people will like vote for a side that shouldn't win for like a very technical sounding reason that actually doesn't really. And, like as a judge, sometimes I've just made like well, okay, I won't say I've made bad decisions because I've always made the decision that was like what I understood. Sometimes I really did not understand what was going on. After a debate round, I've been like, hey, I don't know if this is about to sound really stupid, but ozone is a place, right? It's like a part of the atmosphere. Because I thought it was like the oxygen zone. Nope, ozone's just its own type of gas. And so I have to have both of the teams go like, nah, dude. It's like, well, my bad. But I try to be like as open as just like what I don't know about, and like, hey, I'm judging this to the best of my ability, and this is the best of my ability. Uh, but I don't know. I feel like I also it's easier for me to do that, right? It's easier for me to then be like, well, I don't know. I have a YouTube channel where I talk about debate. People know I know about debate. I'm not going to be like as uh my reputation's not going to be as tarnished. To what degree do you feel like that rears its head in policy? Because it is so technical, and people are so invested, and inevitably you're going to be judged in these debate events by people who aren't as technically skilled as you, but everyone's looking at the round in the most sort of objective way and not in the sort of from that judge's perspective. How does that play out? Do you feel like there is this dynamic where judges sort of try to fake an understanding of what's actually going on?
I think this is pervasive. Like, I think that this is a very common problem because everybody wants to maintain sort of the facade of objectivity and everybody wants to act like there's a correct decision and they've like found it, they've been enlightened. But I do think at the end of every policy debate round, it does come back to like for example, me and Danush at nationals last year, we talked about this a lot because there was a particular decision where, you know, we went for an inflation disadvantage against a jobs guarantee affirmative on the fiscal redistribution topic, and essentially a judge took about 30 minutes longer than all the other judges when they were evaluating it. And they looked through the document and read one particular piece of affirmative evidence that they had like vaguely referenced, and they were like, according to this line of this piece of evidence, you know, I really think that, you know, this undermines the argument that you made. And I feel like some judges, for two reasons. One, they want to make their decision seem right because they don't want to be, you know, embarrassed by the room. And they want to come across like they are, you know, they're a good debater. You know, they probably felt like their career was, you know, a lot. They were super invested in when they did policy debate, and they want to maintain that. And then also, you know, they want to have the same decision as the other judges in the room. So they look at each other and they're like, yeah, guys, we're all together on this one. Uh, and I think that that leads to judges, at least the phrasing me and Danush always used was not taking the simplest path to the ballot, right? They're,
Hmm.
they're like finding a new way to like consider a factor that's over here when like you just heard the debate. I feel like there is something, at least when I have evaluated debates since getting out, like my feeling is just like in my heart, I know who won this debate, and now I'm like going to take the simplest explanation as to how I'm going to get there.
Yeah, a lot to say on that, but Danush, do you share that sentiment? Is that, I mean, it sounds like it's something you guys have talked about.
I do share a lot of the things he said, like the sentiment, but I want to push back a little bit. I think this is a very specific archetype of judge. But one thing that's really interesting is like college policy debaters and college policy coaches and folks that have gone through that system, like the NDT CETA circuit, are ridiculously good at the kind of skills that are required to evaluate a policy debate, right? So something that people often say is like the worst debater that qualifies for the national debate tournament would beat most of the teams that qualify for the high school TSC, like maybe almost all of them, right? So even if this person is a first year out or a second year out, they're like significantly better than the two high school debaters in the room or four high school
Mhm.
debaters. So when it's folks that have been through that college ecosystem, they are really good at evaluating things technically, even if their resume may have been worse in high school, right? So like
Hmm.
that skill gap just by joining a college debate team, they are far ahead of us. But I think that the thing Kaden is talking about are like the folks who don't enter that college system, like they stay in the high school debate realm and they're coaches of their high school debate team, and that's all they've been doing and all they've been exposed to. Those people often make like a little bit questionable decisions because I think in college, once you go through that system, you're forced to at least improve or learn about debate. But a lot of judges in every event are like very dogmatic. They don't want to think about debate. They kind of just want to keep their same biases standard. Like they're not trying to learn or trying to improve. They're not trying to think about like what are all the ways we can permute a counter plan. They're just like, here, I have to show up, judge these 4 rounds, and then move on.
I have two questions that are actually popping up as a result of that. How common is it? And I mean, I don't know, you don't have the statistics in front of you, but just from being in the scene, like how commonly do high school policy debaters enter college policy debate? I mean, obviously, the scenes. I don't know. Actually, I don't know
Yeah.
comparatively how popular policy is in high school, but obviously not every college does policy debate, but a lot of like really good colleges do it, which is different than like Parley, right? Or certainly like
Mhm.
public forum, right?
Yeah.
But you know, like Berkeley, Harvard, these have like policy teams. Is it more common for high school debaters to enter college debate in policy?
I think policy is by far the largest pipeline for people who want to continue doing their same debate event from high school to college. And I think that there's really two different groups because when we talk about policy debate, there is like the largest group of policy debaters is not these progressive like national circuit policy debaters. It's like people who do UIL stuff, who do stuff at their state tournament level, who go to locals and stuff. I would say that those people are not usually taking the pipeline straight to like these college schools, like to Michigan, to Emory, to all these schools. Um, but really, when you get to like national circuit, people who are at the TOC or want to go to the TOC and are reasonably close to it in high school policy are usually on, I would say, probably the highest percent rate of high schoolers to college of any event. And I know some people who have like changed what college they want to go to because of their policy debate team. Like, I know people who live in Texas who want to go to Michigan to be on the Michigan policy debate team. Like, I don't see kids shaping their college decisions for any other debate event.
Well, and Danush, I'll ask you this. That leads me to the second thing that came to mind, which is like so many people, I don't know, like posting on the debate subreddit or whatever, right? Are like, hey, like I want to do debate because I think it'll look good for college. Like, what do I need to do? Like, what is the minimum requirement for me to now get like the benefits of this on my application? Um, Am I right in thinking that's probably less common in policy than in something like public forum, Danush?
Yeah, I think that even maybe not even public forum is the right one to talk about. I think congressional debate, extemporaneous debate, or extemporaneous speaking, these are the
Yeah,
ones
yeah.
where this mindset is really prevalent. I think the reason that's the case is like if you really wanted to like go to an extemp tournament or Congress tournament just because you thought it would help your resume and that you think would help you for college, that's a fine mindset to have, and you might even do really well. Like you could do really, really well in these events, right? I think the difference in policy is like the top 10 teams in the country, maybe even top 50 teams in the country, are probably spending a full-time job worth of work every single week, learning and thinking and sort of being in that debate mindset, which isn't the same for these other kinds of events that are a bit less committing. So if you get into the mindset of, hey, I just want to increase my resume or boost my resume, you just won't win. Like it's not a really like difficult concept to understand. Like you will lose to the guy that doesn't actually care about his resume, but just really, really loves this activity, which was me and Kaden for a long portion of our life, right? Like we were spending that much time and we didn't actually care about our resume in the end. But I think that's basically like the answer to your question. Like you just won't do
Well,
that well.
well, and this kind of ties back to something that I wanted to ask about earlier, which is like we've been talking about it in the abstract. Like, give me a concrete idea of what that workload looks like. Like, let's say it's October and it's a Monday and you're working on your policy case. Like, what does that routine look like for you? Let's say you get out of school, I don't know, 2:30, 3 o'clock.
So I would almost start the discussion before we start talking about getting out of school, because especially at least when I was back in high school, we've got our computers out all day. We're supposed to be doing assignments. I have got like theory blocks up the entire time. Probably if I'm at school for 8 hours, probably it's open on my computer 6 hours out of the day. And I am like writing theory block back files for like, we didn't have conditionality blocks for a long time. So I'm like conditionality blocks, all this stuff. Uh, it is probably throughout high school in the last 2 years was open on my computer and I was adjusting files like putting files together for probably 8 hours a day, every day when we weren't, competing on the weekends. So I think that's really what it looks like, especially because we had to build sort of a wealth of back files and stuff on our own. As it took a lot of effort putting that together. And We sort of came up with a lot of strategies to help streamline that process for us because we weren't going to go out and do it necessarily the same way that big schools like, you know, the biggest schools in high school policy where we don't want to name names or anything, but some of those big schools would.
Yeah, no, Danush, what did that look like for you in terms of the actual like workload?
Yeah, I'm lazy. I don't know what else to say here. I think that like ultimately Kaden did like a lot of the majority of the work, and I think that uh that's like basically it. Like obviously I cut some cards and stuff. Like even now I'm not the best card cutter. I guess I can speak broadly about like the mindset or like I guess what policy debate like the culture looks like. I think that's more important here is like some college teams and like even high school teams will have people they hire like college debaters that like their sole authority or their sole job is just to cut cards. Like they're called a card cutter, right? And you can
Yeah.
imagine this makes no sense to people in other events, but like the teams that we're debating, like me and Kaden, have multiple coaches, have a very large team of 10, 15 people that they can share this responsibility between. The reason why Caden's workload seems like very astronomical or ridiculous is because he's doing a job that a lot of other people are supposed to be doing, and he has to do it himself. So that's why it's taking him such a long time. But I think that all policy debaters spend a lot of time, maybe not as much as Kaden, but it's because of the position that we're in that ultimately like resulted in that workload. And also because I'm lazy and I'm a bad teammate.
No, but I mean, I think it's important to like actually represent what you do and what you
Yeah.
can get away with. Because I don't know, sometimes people will read. It's interesting because like I'll get a chance to talk to people like you guys who've like been there and like done it and competed at high levels. Um, but also because I have like a YouTube channel and post on Reddit and stuff, people who are like just starting will reach out to me and ask me like, hey, how many hours a week do I need to do debate? And I'll be like, I don't, I don't know. And I think it'll depend on the event and how well you want to do and so on. And eventually it becomes kind of an irrelevant question. Like by
Mhm.
the time you're in that position, Caden, like you're not putting in these hours because like someone somewhere told you that's what you're supposed to do. Um, but I guess I do want to know a little bit more about these sort of I guess, circumstantial forces, right, that we're kind of talking about, right? So there's I had this question for Paul the other day. I texted him. I said this to you guys in an email, but just to reiterate, sorry he couldn't be here. He teaches summer school and they're like 5 hour a day classes. And anyway,
Yeah.
um, but I texted Paul this question the other day because I was like, I wonder if this will make a good Proteus video, which is one to think about all of the services you could buy in debate. Like, let's say you had an unlimited amount of money to spend in debate. What could you buy? So, card cutters is one of them. Prep groups is another. Like, what does like hourly online coaching or something like that look like? And like camps, for example,
Mhm.
like what do they cost? And if you wanted to go to every camp, right? So the first layer of the question is like, what are all the things you can buy? The second layer to the question is uh like what would that cost in total? Like what is the cost of maxing out in debate? But then the third layer of the question, which I don't really know the answer to, is okay, let's say you do that, but you're an otherwise ordinary person, let's say. Would you lose debate rounds? Like how unskilled do you have to be in debate personally for you to max out everything you could spend in debate and still lose to a team that doesn't have those resources? Sounds like you guys didn't have a lot of those resources and were doing a lot of it on your own. You had some excellent videos talking about cross-X to help a little bit. But no, like that's a question that I feel like you guys spent a couple years answering for yourself. And it's also hard to talk about this sort of thing without inherently invalidating large schools. I'll get to that in a minute because I've worked with a lot of large schools, right? And
Mhm.
I know kind of um, not necessarily the top debate schools in every event, but I'll talk about that perspective in a little bit. But just in a, we're not saying anything about any other school. What is the perception that somebody in your position has? What are the feelings that you feel about this event while you're doing it in terms of the viability of competing against resources without your own resources?
I mean, to a degree, there is a cutoff at which it becomes impossible. I think that there's one situation that's impossible for people who don't have, especially like a large team of people who are card cutting, and usually in high school, it's college debaters who are helping you, and I think that's the TOC. I don't think, at least especially, I'd say for policy teams, meaning like policy arguments. Not critical arguments. Those kinds of arguments at the TOC, you just can't. It's extremely hard to overcome without that prep help. Critical teams do have a different path towards it because there's less evidentiary burden, and it's a lot more about how you make arguments in the round. And I think that's why, Danush and I chose that path. But I think to get back at your question, I think the vibes from somebody who is sort of looking into the space is yeah, you need to be very strategic about how you choose to prepare and what arguments you choose to prepare because you've only got so much time in comparison to them. And you need to be very efficient about how you allocate that. Like for example, me and Danush, I did a lot of the prep just because I was like so interested and engrossed in it. And like you said a minute ago, it wasn't about, whether it's 60 hours a week or not. It was about whether it's enough, like to be enough for the tournament. And the truth is, the answer for everybody watching, it will never be enough, but you can continue to pursue it until it, gets you there. Um, Really, it's just, yeah, I'm losing my train of thought, but filling back files to the extent that you can and picking arguments. Like we would not go and cut new dis ads and things. I will be the first to admit you should steal things from the wiki if you are a small school. Do not have a single inch of shame about it. You should be ripping cards from people. I don't care if it still has their name on it. Steal their cards, steal dis ads, steal arguments, make your own files out of their stuff. I will have no shame for all the small school debaters out there. Take what's yours. I think that it's the biggest way to even the playing field is if somebody else has the money to go spend on camp, take the camp back files. If somebody else has, is posting it on the wiki, which is a wonderful norm to help smaller debaters get evidence, and um, I think you should just weaponize that in every way that you can to even the playing field.
Danush, what do you think? What was
I'm
your experience with it?
yeah,
Not necessarily. I mean, you can
I'm a
also
little bit
weigh in
confused on like
on.
the initial question. Like, what are we like? What is the real question you're asking?
So two layers, right? The initial question is like, how viable did it feel to you competing against schools that had resources that you didn't? And then I suppose the layer beneath that is like what you advocate for people in that position to do.
Um, I think that I guess I can make a broad statement. It's a little bit disconnected from my personal experience, but I think what's important for folks to understand is having more bodies, like physical people who can do work, is much, much more important in policy debate than almost every other event. So having a larger team is of course helpful, and being a big school is important. There's well, now that LD is very close to policy, there's a lot of LD big schools. Now that PF is becoming closer to policy, there's a lot of PF big schools. So of course having a large team is important in every event, but it's really important in policy. So I think
I
that's
don't want to cut you off, but
yeah.
like I work with like sometimes I will judge weekend tournaments for like Bronx Science, or
Hmm.
I am friends with the coach for Stuyvesant High School. These are like very big debate programs. I don't work with with their policy side much, but I'll coach like the PF kids at Sty for a tournament or something. And these are very big programs, but nobody shares files. Like they haven't figured out that like Jimmy will have his debate case and all of their prep. Sarah will have all of her debate case and her prep, and Jimmy and Sarah will never see each other's files. And I'm trying to explain to
Yeah.
them that, like, the advantage you have is that together, no one will be able to compete with your 130%. I don't know how many people are
Mhm.
on the team, right? But if you organize this, right? Um, but I can say a little bit more about kind of like my perspective on the big school stuff. But yeah, right. So, but in policy, that's not the case. Like big schools, like understand what you're supposed to do, right? And so to kind of just respond to where you're saying like LD and PF are getting big, like yeah, but I don't think that stuff is as well established even in those formats of debate, even at big schools compared to policy debate.
Yeah, I think I don't want to say that you're wrong, right? But I think that there is like a unique element of policy debate that might be why these students have never realized that, right? And it's the idea of like in policy debate, we use this word like third, fourth, fifth, sixth, 26 level testing, right? It's like what does this mean, right? It's like when somebody answers an argument and they answer it again and we keep going down this chain, how many
Mm,
times does that happen in the debate and how nuanced and in-depth does that response get? The problem with PF and LD, and I'll talk about PF because that's what I've the most experience in, is like the fifth, sixth level testing just never happens. The
right.
round is too short. The speeches are too short. Judges are not that experienced. Nobody knows a lot about the topic. It switches every couple months. There's so many factors that make those events, that kind of testing impossible. That testing is what makes us combining all your files, having a lot of research, having a big team. That's what it benefits the most of, because when you're getting those really in-depth like discussions, having the most research is really important. Then it's not as important in other events where that's not the focus, basically. If that makes sense.
So most of my coaching was at the college level in NPDA college Parley, and I would argue that we don't have testing in college Parley. If we do, it's superficial and it's like at best second or third level. But in Parley, like I make a claim about, I don't know, something about carbon emissions from you know plastic factories, and you kind of just got to go with it, right? Because like you can't ask to see the evidence, and you might ask me to explain something and maybe I will, or you might push back in some way and maybe I can explain. But then it becomes that, right? If you have a source that says actually that's not true, I can't examine that piece of evidence. And I think public forum has a lot going against it also, not only just the there's you only have a month, you only have two tournaments with a topic, right? And then at those tournaments, like an argument's going to come up maybe one time, maybe two times, right? The card cutting culture around it isn't there. Your judge isn't going to ask to see the evidence and maybe isn't flowing it, right? I think the only format of debate, I have this has the potential to go into a huge tangent. I don't want it to, but I think everyone is wrong in how we teach debate, and I'm working on what I think we should do instead. And I think there's only three aspects of an argument that matter. It's relevance to the topic or to whatever you're responding to. It's accuracy, like how useful the evidence is, and then its significance. So on like a disad, that'll be the impact on like on a T, that would be the voter, right? But I feel like accuracy matters very little in every debate format. I think that's least true of policy. I think policy structurally and just also in sort of like the meta and the culture around it will actually do the most work to dig into like looking at your evidence and seeing if it has problems and trying to cut something against that piece of evidence, right? And maybe I think this is what you guys are referencing when you're saying you're not going for policy, or I guess like topical arguments, let's say, for lack of a better word. Because something will post date your evidence tomorrow, like by
Mhm.
definition, right? And it's a year-long event. So if you, like you were saying with these like politics disads, like if you want to read a politics disad, that'll get outdated as soon as some other somewhat relevant article is published somewhere tomorrow. And so it's really hard, I imagine, to be the politics disad two-person team, uh, because you not only have to be cutting arguments against everything everybody else is running, but now you have to constantly be updating your politics argument, right?
Hmm.
So how in your mind does the K get around that? And like, and also, is there, I think in a lot of other formats, people would hold that against the K. Like,
Hmm.
think of that. Yeah. And like, to what degree is that true in policy? Because I think it's really common, there's a common sentiment in other formats, to be like, if you like K's, go do policy, right? And like, in policy, is the K just like, yep, it's the K and we all know it and we all love it? Or is there this sort of like, hey man, I have to update these cards every day and you're just reading the same thing you read in October? Like, what is that dynamic? So, two-part question, I suppose. How do you think the K functionally alleviates a lot of these burdens? And that might also be like theory or something like that, right? But like, let's say non-topical arguments, right? Like, how do you think non-topical arguments alleviate the prep burden? And then how is that seen in the actual circuit?
I guess I can answer the first part if Kaden wants to take the second part.
Sure.
I guess the first part is like I actually have thought about this a lot, right? I think that we can start with an event that's not policy debate and then apply those principles to understand why the K is useful. So something like extemporaneous speaking, everyone knows that this event is easier to improve at than policy debate, right? Like generally we feel this way. And the reason that's the case is because of how repetitive it is, right? So every extem speech, even if it's on vastly different topics, if you watch the national finalists, all six of them sound almost the same, right? If you put a blindfold on, right, and you watch or I guess you're not watching anymore, but you listen to the
Yeah.
round. Like literally, I told my coach, I was like, it literally feels like I'm just listening to the same six people, right? Like they're the same person that just went up six times. So I think that the more repetitive you can make something, the better at it you're going to be than your opponent, right? So if I've heard this 2NR from my opponent 7 times, but he's only given it for the first time, I'm going to win that debate, or at least have a higher chance of winning that debate. So how does this apply to the critique, right? In a policy debate, if I read an affirmative, there in the season, there's probably like 20 counter plans, 20 disads, 20 topicality arguments they can read against my affirmative, right? Or I'm exaggerating a little bit, but at
Yeah,
least
yeah.
there's probably a lot that are viable. But for the critique, it's like you have topicality, you have the capitalism critique against the critique, but topicality will probably be like 90% of the last speech from the opponent and almost 100% when it's a team that reads exclusively policy arguments because this is what they know, right? So if the opponent is giving their T2NR, so their T negative speech for the 5th time this season, but it's the 50th time that I've heard the same speech, right? That's the way that you alleviate the burden of prep, because this is the only chance from a small school perspective that I'm ever going to be more prepared than the opponent. It's like the only instance, because otherwise I'm just going to get crushed on the politics that they cut last night at like 7 p.m. while I was sleeping or something like that.
No, I mean, I think that's an aspect of what I'm trying to explain to people, why the K is such a, or like theory or whatever, is such a powerful tool in debate for good or for bad, right? One of the things that they don't think about is every debate becomes the same. Like, I am now debating a security K out of one of the 40 things I've debated in the last 2 months, but you are debating the security K as the only thing that you've been debating in the last 2 months, and there's only a couple answers to it. And so every single round you get to practice answering framework or topicality or something again, which is a huge advantage, right?
Hmm.
Um, I want to follow up in a minute about like this is the only thing that small schools can do. Like, I think it's a very different thing when um I think there's a lot to talk about there in terms of like the sort of like equity aspects of it, right? But
Hmm.
Kaden, we are turning it over to you to hear. I think what I asked was like, how, I guess that is relating to what I'm talking about. Like, how is that seen in the circuit? What was your experience doing that in rounds against a team that was cutting cards while you were sleeping?
I mean, I think that that's totally true because of this sort of imbalance in sort of quote unquote fairness, right? Like one team's is like, oh, I cut all this evidence, and you never have to cut evidence because you read the critique and you know that you're just going to hit framework in the CAPK because that's there are more unique answers, and we like to come up with more unique answers, but that's really what you're going to see. And because we recognize that, there's this sort of fairness imbalance, and there's definitely a split in both the high school community and even the college community between people who view themselves as critical debaters and people who view themselves as sort of policy debaters. And these people sort of at tournaments like sit in their own circles, and like in the cafeteria they're sort of like in their own different sides, and like it's not quite that dramatic because there's definitely like people are all friends, and like people can separate themselves from the arguments that we read, but there is a noticeable sort of distinction and sort of a, like negative sentiment between these two groups. Um, and I really think that we've seen that multiple times throughout our career. People who just kind of look down. Danush, are there any like big stories that you can remember of people who are like, ugh, upset about, seeing the K?
Yeah, I remember one debate, right? Like, I think that it's really easy to explain this in terms of the judges' mindsets. Like, if they've been judging for 15 years and it's their thousandth and eighth time hearing a topicality 2NR versus a critical affirmative 2AR, the reality is, right? Even as much as they want to separate their own opinion or be as objective as possible, after 1,000 times of rehashing this debate, they eventually have like solidified a conclusion. Like, I think topicality is true, or I don't care and I don't think it's true, right? So then how it played out in this debate was like we're debating a team, and like again, like I'm not trying to be rude, or I'm not going to obviously say the name of the team, but even there was a team watching us in that debate, and after the debate they were like, this was a very easy debate to decide, and it was like in terms of the flow, in terms of everything that a normal debate would be decided on, was very like it made a lot of sense what the decision was. But the judge started the sort of feedback or the RFD, and like 90% of the RFD was just like roasting us. Like it was just like this app sucks. Like you should have changed this piece of evidence. Like that, like it was a really strange RFD because like, bro, like they didn't say any of this, right? It's like he was like making arguments for them. He's like during this debate, this speech, you should have said this, and I was like, okay, so like, and then like. But he prefaced the decision. And I was like, okay, so like this was the feedback, and generally, I guess the point I'm trying to make is like, those two camps exist, but when those two camps become judges, it's I think the price you pay in a sense for reading the same argument every debate is that obviously you're more prepared, but sometimes it doesn't matter because the judge just doesn't care, right? Because they have been very strongly like solidified this position, and that's the position that you now have to conform to. But the reality is, if you conform to their view, unlike in other events where you're trying to sort of think about the judge's mindset, if I put myself in the mindset of a person that thinks topicality is true and I'm reading the critique, well, like there's only one option, and that's that I'm going to lose the round, right? So I don't really have that choice.
Can I ask this? And I wonder. I mean, we're all friends. We can speak
Hmm.
candidly about
Yeah.
this. If the prep differential wasn't there, do you think you would have got? Because I'm sure when you're arguing the K and they're reading a topicality, you have to argue why this is the most important thing that we need to be talking about, and that it has some sort of outside of the round impact, and why, like, yeah, I read the
Yeah.
same thing every round. I'm going to read the same thing every round until capitalism's dead or whatever. And like this is, but like if this prep differential wasn't there, would you be a more versatile team at least, or would you be reading the K as often? Or do you feel
Uh,
like the argument's true and that like it's as important as it's worthy of being used every round?
I think this speaks to some of the logic behind K-debate in the first place, because you're correct that K-debate often makes this argument that like the settler colonialism or capitalism argument that I'm making in the 1AC is sort of like a protest towards something, or I'm sending a message right now. And of course, we said that all the time because that's like is the answer to some of the T arguments. And I personally don't believe that those arguments are true, and I didn't when I said them. And I think that that speaks to some of the logic behind K debate, that some people just say these things and like I don't know whatever T debaters say, like turn out like Karl Rove or whatever. Um, I I think that we always made these arguments strategically, and that's just the truth behind it. Uh, and like not to say that they aren't true, we just never really took a moral lens to it. We were making them because they were the answer to the T argument. Um, Personally, like I really liked researching policy arguments too. Like we always read the cap on the negative. I would say it was like 90% of 2NRs in progressive rounds. I liked making that argument. I thought it was very strategic in debate for a lot of reasons, especially for a small school. And then, on the affirmative at nationals, we read a policy F. Like at that nationals that we got fourth, we prepped it because we thought there would be a lot of judges at NSDA that wouldn't, be as open to the K. So we prepped that af, but we honestly ended up reading it in some rounds that were like fairly progressive and like, we definitely branched out to that. So I don't think if we went, if me and Danush went to a larger school, I do think we would probably have ended up being policy debaters in the sense that we would read topical affirmatives and stuff. And we would read Ks when they were still strategic for us. But I think it would change the calculus around how we prepared because there's just more judges who are always going to be open to evaluating a policy debate in the same consistent way. And part of the reason that we read the K was it introduces a lot of chaos, right? You can upset the prep burden. This team should win. They're more prepared. They're probably a little bit better than you, but you have thrown chaos into the system. You're sort of taking your gamble that you can knock them off and win. So that's what we took. But if we were in the high prep position, we would just read the high prep policy F.
Yeah, I'll add on to this. I think, Sasan, the main thing to understand is that you're speaking to me and Kaden, and these are our experiences, but the vast majority of folks who read the critique are drastically different. So, like, I
Hmm.
think the vast majority of folks that I spoke to who read the critique, they genuinely believe at the bottom of their heart that what they're reading is true, and that's the reason that they've chose to do it in every single debate. So, I'll give you a good example, which is like most anti-blackness debaters are incredibly intelligent, right? And they understand these things at a very, very deep level, and they believe it's more important than all the topics that we've been discussing. And they might be correct, right? So that's why they have chose to read the critique. We're speaking from a perspective because I guess the conversation is going in this direction. And I think that you can understand that me and Kaden care a ridiculous amount about winning the debate. That is like almost the only thing we care about. But for other folks, this isn't the point of debate. And it's not the reason that they read the critique. So our experience is unique. But for most folks who read the critique, they're doing it because they love it and they believe in it and they really want to spread this literature to other people. I think it can often get co-opted by other perspectives like ours, but I think it's important in this conversation to understand that this is not the usual reason that someone is reading a critique, especially in policy debate.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Danush. And I guess one of the reasons I ask about it is because I think one of the frustrations that I have, right? I don't fully understand what my because you guys have watched the videos and you kind of like know my perspective on certain debate things, but outside of that, I'm like some people will kind of know who I am, but if you're a very traditional debater, because I like coached a because I talk about debate a lot, people will sort of just and I understand, theory and K's and stuff like that. They will assume that I'm very like hard progressive. A lot of very hard progressive people will like I couldn't list 20 different counterplan perms for you. It never really mattered to me like that when I was a competitor, and I never needed to coach it for someone I was coaching to do well in the events that I was coaching them in, right? I'm interested in it from a academic standpoint, right? But a lot of those people will see me as a very like traditional whatever judge. Like people will debate in front of me and they'll be like afraid to read a counterplan or something sometimes, right? So I'm interested in it uh, because I see this discussion happen between these two groups a lot, and I feel like I'm able to kind of speak to both sides. And I think one of the things that uh, people who think debate's gotten too progressive and too technical and these teams shouldn't be allowed to do that, one of the things they don't understand is how hard progressive debaters work. And I think it's ridiculous to say that a team like working that hard in debate like doesn't deserve to be rewarded for it, right? So with that having been said, I think debate is poorly designed. And I think that the hypothetical best version of debate is a competition where we could say, do anything you can think to do to succeed in this. And because the goal and the game is well designed, any successful strategy will produce something that we want and something that we care about, right? Like I think maybe about like speed running, right? Like there is no successful speed, very rarely is there a successful speed running strategy where people are like, Well, that violates the spirit of speedrunning, right?
Hmm.
Um, but in debate, it's not as clear like what is the what is debate supposed to do, and it's harder to make rules where like winning means you did the thing that you're supposed to do well, right? um I think you're absolutely right, especially when it comes to like anti-blackness. I live in New York, and most of the work that I did here for 3 years was working with um, what are here called Title I schools. So basically, like the lowest income schools, and helping them start debate teams. And you see them deal with the stuff that K debaters are reading these Ks about, right? And you also like see a lot of these students begin debate from this position of feeling like they're not supposed to be there and they're not supposed to be in the room, and they kind of just like look around and try to copy what other people are doing, and aren't able to do it as well because they don't live in that environment, and they don't go to a school where people speak in academic terms like that. And so it kind of like never quite fits. And something that I really admire about good K debate is the way that it's been able to challenge the traditional forum, and carve a space for people that forum's like left out, right?
Hmm.
I think what I'm curious about though is that like I think the ideal situation, right, is one where people don't need to, and I don't know if you used the word co-opt earlier, but let's
Hmm.
say that's what it is, right? Like, I think the ideal situation is one where there isn't a strategic incentive to co-opt a critique, not because there isn't a reward, but because there isn't a need, right? And so, like, do you have any perspective on how debate could be different in a way that would make you guys focusing on K arguments instead of policy arguments, um, like a change that would make that maybe not necessary? I mean, I don't know if this is something that you spend a lot of time thinking about, and I'm not trying to like put a microphone in front of you and be like fix debate, but I wonder if you have any perspective on that.
I think that one of the arguments that we used to make against uh like in debate rounds, like people like us, and I want to be clear, throughout this discussion, we've said like, oh, we chose K debate because it was easier. I don't
Right.
want to say that we're like K debate is easier in that sense, because I think that you're doing as much work, you're just doing it in something else. Rather
Yep.
than cutting evidence, you are learning how to speak about these arguments. And it's just a different kind of preparation that is more tooled towards people who don't have that evidentiary ability to produce cards. But to answer your question more specifically, I think that one of the things that could happen in debate is people should just go for arguments about the sort of practice more, not topicality in a sense, but say somebody's reading a settler colonialism affirmative uh, on whatever topic. I think that there is arguments to be made that people don't often make that I always found persuasive regarding like sort of white like co-option of this argument, or like if you are not somebody who either embodies that argument or has a personal connection to that argument, which I think is where K debate originates more heavily. And as
Hmm.
it's come out into like the 2010s 2020s, it's sort of bloomed into other people who don't have any sort of personal connection just sort of make arguments in a technical fashion. I think that these arguments about like weaponizing literature for your own technical purposes need to be developed more, and people should start applying those. And I don't know how we like change the system to like get judges to prefer these arguments and vote for them, but I've always found them persuasive, and when made in front of me, I would vote for them. If it's just like I'm struggling to phrase, it's been a while since I've been super engrossed in like K literature, but debate or Danush, do you remember like some of these arguments that people would make, like the round with that people read that like anti-blackness K and we sort of threw it back in their face? Can you tell that story?
Yeah, so I guess I'll give a practical recommendation because I think that us speaking and paraphrasing is not valuable. There are Black debaters who have written about the idea of non-Black people reading anti-Blackness literature. There's a really good article on a place called The Drinking Gourd. I think this is a blog where there's a really important article where they write about what this looks like. But I guess I'll say this: I've never heard a speech where someone says this, where someone says like non-Black people shouldn't be reading Afro-pessimism, settlers might not be the best people to be reading settler colonialism. I never really heard this argument and not been convinced by it. Is what I think me and Kaden are trying to explain because there's like a gut feeling and that I think everybody that generally knows that like these are the folks that should have the limelight or the spotlight when they're actually reading critiques about their own culture and identity. But I think that's something that's been is what Kaden is saying has become less prioritized and what he thinks should come back. Uh, but as for like your main question, which is the idea of like what should folks do or what would I do to fix debate? I just don't think it's possible as a practical recommendation. I think that if folks are in the position that me and Kaden are in, they should not do policy debate if their goal is success, right? So if their goal is success, they should choose events like congressional debate or extemporaneous speaking, where this just isn't a problem. Every year almost, there's a person from a random high school with barely any coaching
Hmm.
that does really, really well in these events like congressional debate or extemporaneous speaking because it's just much more possible because of all the reasons we've discussed prior. The only ideal world would be a world when everybody has access to the same Dropbox, the same files, the same things, but that's just never going to happen. And I think that that's why college is a really great experience for folks who kind of felt like they were sidelined in high school because in college, even the worst college team has much more resources than even the best high school programs. So for those folks, if they really want to try out policy debate and all the things me and Kaden have been talking about like resonates with them, researching a lot, thinking a lot, getting in depth, they should do debate in college because at least from my perspective, I'm obviously an outsider looking in. That's a much more equitable form of the problems that we're talking about.
I love hearing that because I only competed in debate in high school. My high school didn't have a debate team, and I kind of ended up on my college debate team a while after I started going there. Um, and it was really sort of a shock. Well, two things were a bit of a shock once I started getting introduced to high school debate. One is the relative lack of resources from like, I mean, the least resourced college debate team has a college professor who has at least a master's degree in communications, right? Like teaching this communication event. And that's like the floor, right? And most of your judges, the least experienced judge is a longtime judge who has the used to compete as a whatever. So all of that is also true. The other thing that's weird about high school debate is that it's debate, but it's a bunch of high schoolers. So you have like all of the like teenage high school stuff happening like at the same time that you have this like academia, you know, like this academy happening. So that's another weird aspect of it. But I think you're I appreciate you pointing that out for a lot of people because I think when before Paul and I even started Proteus, we like went on the debate subreddit and like tried to talk to people about like why don't high schoolers do college debate? Like high school debate is huge, college debate is relatively small, and like why is that? And the answer that I've gotten, and let me know if this resonates with you at all, is one, three things. One, they don't have college public forum, but they have college LD. People don't do that. Uh, Two, that a lot of people just only do uh, debate because they're interested in like college and then they already got into college and like now you go to a good college and you don't want to spend 60 hours a week working on this event. You want to go like do college stuff. But then I think there's also this sentiment that like people who really compete on the national circuit or by the end of those 4 years just sort of spent, just sort of like done, burnt out.
Mm.
And the last part especially, I wonder to what degree like that resonates. And do you feel that that's because you said policy has a stronger pipeline than any other event. Does that factor in? Like, do you feel that people finish 4 years of policy debate and they're just sort of like exhausted?
Done. Yeah.
Yeah, done.
I think really people get to the end, especially if they really jump into like this intense sort of Nats progressive grind. And one of two things happens. Group one jumps into it and is so interested and doesn't burn out and wants to go all the way through college. Group two is so invested that they burn out in 4 years and are just like, I can't physically imagine doing this another time. And I think that some of that has to do with like, you know, I think a lot of kids who have more resources at schools don't get as burnt out in that period of time. So I notice a higher tendency for those kids to go on to the Michigans and Emorys of the world in college and continue doing it. Like for me, my experience, I got done with policy debate and I decided for two reasons really I didn't want to continue and I haven't in college, despite the fact that UT has like a good team. Really just because, like you said, debate is not a career forward thing. Like the piece of advice I'll put out for people who are looking at debate is like something to do, and I should specify policy debate, something that people are looking to do to like, put on a resume or be seen for a career. It's not like a worthwhile time investment for you. You should be doing something else. You should be doing like a business club. You should be doing Congress. You should be doing, extemp speaking. And I think that really rears its head for people when they finally get to college, because this is the period of your life when you're building not just like your high school resume because you want to go to college, but you're in college and you are like your career will stem out of this in some way. And I think that it's just such a heavy time investment. And I'm sure that there are pathways for people who do college policy debate to find a career out of that. They're intelligent people who are going to find a path forward. But I think that it is a crazy amount of time to invest when there's a lot of other opportunities out there. And that's what drew me away at the point
I,
that I
I
got to college.
I agree that they're educated and talented and capable. There's not that many paths,
Yeah.
right? There's, I don't know, 10,000, 5,000 college policy debaters. I don't think there's 5,000 college policy jobs, you know? So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's about sort of like pivoting that into something for most people. And you could probably pivot into the same thing from something that's less of a time commitment.
hmm
Danush, what's your perspective on all this? The sort of the burnout. There's a lot of layers. I mean, you could talk about what Kaden was talking about, or if you had your own initial thoughts on the question.
Yeah, so Kaden and I spoke about this briefly, like maybe last year, and he actually put it really beautifully. I was a bit surprised that he didn't include this part in his answer, so I guess I'll say it now. And it's the idea that like when I'm sitting in like my US history class in high school, and we spend like a couple minutes on like learning about the Trail of Tears, and then I'm in my high school policy debate round, and I've thought so much more deeply about a subject that I care so much more about. I think it is impossible to get that level of intellectual stimulation in high school unless you're doing policy debate for a lot of folks, right? It's really difficult to access that deep level of research in anything else. There's very few other places you can find it. But I think the reason that folks don't do it in college is because, like, for example, we'll both be at the University of Texas in the fall. And the reality is we have like more than, I don't know, like thousands of student organizations on campus and thousands of other things like internships and jobs. And I think that becoming that intellectually stimulated is possible in college, doing a lot of things that are not debate. But in high school, it's really hard for those folks who really dig that like intellectual stimulation to do anything but debate. So then when they get to college and like, hey, like I want to go do an internship at a think tank about this subject, maybe that's more cool for them than debate, but it scratches that same itch, if you understand what I'm saying.
Totally, totally. And I worked at a community college, which isn't quite high school, but in terms of just like opportunities to do stuff like that, like that's what more than anything I think built our program was it's a commuter school. Everyone's commuting in, they're going to their like remedial classes and going home. Like it gave people a place to be, a thing to do, and um, more exciting opportunities even to progress to like transfer to a better school for your junior senior year than any other thing on campus really gave you the option of doing. But then yeah, a lot of our kids transfer out of our schools and go to schools that maybe even have debate teams and then like don't keep doing it because like you're in Berkeley, like do the Berkeley thing, like don't do well, so there's questions that I try to ask everybody who comes through here. I think now's a good time to transition into some of those. Um, I guess we don't have to do these in any particular order, but just starting with the top, can you think of somebody who had a really significant impact on your debate career, but just is not aware of it. You haven't had a chance to explain that to them, or maybe you don't have the opportunity for them to hear about it, or yeah, what does anything come to mind for that?
I think first for me, and I think this person affected Danush too, but he may think of a different person in the meantime. And I think you might actually know this person, Sasan. Do you know a guy named Josh Smith who was on UT Tyler's Parley team past couple years?
I don't know the 4 year uh Parley circuit well, but I might have met or heard of this person, and just I would certainly wouldn't know them as Josh Smith, but I might have met a
Hmm.
Josh and it'll click. But no, tell me about Josh.
I think Paul's mentioned him in a couple videos before because he's a little deeper in the Parley
Yeah,
circuit.
yeah, yeah.
But Josh was on UT Tyler's Parley team, and he came and helped judge and initially started doing like Zoom coaching just for us and a couple of the other kids at our school, just very early on in our career. And I think he's one of the people that helped. You know, he's now like come back and is coaching as a teacher one of the other schools in our district.
Oh, that's awesome.
But Josh is one of the people who's really transitioned us from sort of like being interested in debate and like messing around in PF and kind of like throwing arguments around to teaching us like here is what the path towards success looks like. So I think he really put us on the path towards like, you know, lining up how we should prepare for things, sort of teaching us the pathway to go down. So Josh Smith is the person that I would say.
You'd say that's because of the practical advice, or just having the opportunity to sort of speak to someone who had like been there, so to speak.
Really just the opportunity to speak to someone who had been there because Josh got there at a time where we were pretty lost. I don't think if he hadn't shown up, we would have really gotten on track in the way that we did. And I think the advice he gave us was very similar to sort of the path that we eventually went down. He went to another school in sort of the North Texas area in high school called he went to Princeton, or no, he went to Lindale High School. But he, you know, another small school that didn't have, you know, a super large program, and he sort of read the K on both sides as a small school debater, and he showed us what the path towards that was like. And we sort of just followed in his footsteps, and he was sharing files and stuff that he'd sort of self-constructed over the years with us, and it sort of showed us how to start putting together things on our own in that way. And that's really what set us on the path to sort of self-sufficiency.
That's awesome. Danush, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, so I'd also like to talk about Josh, but I have one more person in mind. So, but I'll start with Josh. I think that a really cool thing is like I'm sure you've experienced it. Not all good debaters are good at coaching or good at teaching,
Mm,
right? And a lot of them are really poor at teaching and coaching actually because they get a bit frustrated, right? So I think that Josh is a really good example of someone who is deeply intelligent, but also able to communicate that knowledge to someone like me and Kaden when we were 16, when we didn't know anything about debate. He was able to explain it at such like a basic level, a rudimentary level. And then once we, let's say a year later, were able to take in more information, he taught it at a more advanced level. I think that was really valuable. Um, as for
that,
my
that
person,
sounds like an awesome person to now also be a teacher. So
yeah,
Hmm.
exactly.
Yeah.
really cool. Go ahead though.
Yeah, as for my person, I hate being sappy, but I think it is Kaden, right? I've never told him directly, but the reality is like I really love the execution of debate, right? Like in the debate round, in that hour and a half, like that's what's really important to me. But I really hate preparing, right? So it's like, how is this possible? Like I hate preparing, but we did so much policy debate, and I think it's just Caden's like work ethic is just ridiculous. Like seriously, like I mean this, like I don't think I've ever met somebody who cares that much about debate and is that obsessed, and the amount of preparation he does is like literally inhuman. Like, it doesn't even make sense like how one person can do this much work. And also, I think he's just like going from sophomore year. I think most folks who are this obsessed about debate were always good at debate, but his journey from like being someone who doesn't really know much about the activity to just improving so rapidly is really inspiring. I think for everybody watching, but just in general for me personally as well.
That's really sweet. Okay. What is everyone but you wrong about in debate?
Dude, I got to think about this one.
Okay, I can go ahead if you need to think.
Sure.
So this is my favorite question actually from the email. So I'm
Yeah.
thinking about how to phrase this still, but I guess I'll say it like this. It is better to win dishonorably than lose honestly, right? I think everybody is wrong about this, especially teachers and coaches, right? You should read that argument you didn't feel like was very like super intellectually sound. You should say that thing that you were meaning to, because the worst thing when you leave a debate round is having regret. Regret that if you would have said this, regret that if you would have made this argument, regret that if you would have read this card, that the debate outcome would have been differently. And more importantly, like no matter how much you want to distance yourself from this idea, debate is about winning at the end of the day, right? For most folks who are doing really well, this is what they care about. And then it's weird that those coaches who are so successful have this mindset that's like, no, you should lose, but make sure you don't read that theory argument because it's a little bit funny, and they might not be prepared, and it's actually incorrect, but they might not that figure that in round. It's a really weird mindset. I think that it's always more important to win than lose, at least for me. And I think that's what everybody's wrong about, especially, the older generation. Maybe I'll learn more when I'm wiser and older, but we'll see about that.
No, this reminds me of this interview that they did recently with Keanu Reeves when they were promoting like the new Matrix movie, and they were talking about Gen Z, and they're like, every Gen Z person I've talked to about this says that they don't really get why you would want to leave the Matrix. Like, yes, it seems
Yeah.
like it kind of sucks outside the Matrix, you know? And I do feel like it is a little bit. I'm about to hurt my own feelings. I think it is a little boomerish to be like, no, you should lose, and because that's not that's fair. But I think the part of it that does really resonate though is uh, Paul and my team mottos for debate are cowardice as a voting issue, which like if you didn't make an argument because you were too scared, like you deserve to lose. And a huge part of that is because you coach these people, and then they come back from a round and they lose, and you're like, what happened? It's like, oh, they said this, and it's like, did you try saying this? And they're like, I thought of that, but I didn't, whatever. And it's like, well, now I can't coach you because you already know the argument, but I don't know if it would have worked or if it wouldn't have worked and why it wouldn't have worked, and now like we can't
Mhm.
improve, right? And um I mean, I think what you're saying resonates in the sense that I think a game by definition is centered around like its win condition. Um, and I think I want debate to be a game where people don't have to make those trade-offs between like an argument being valuable and an argument being good. But I think that's a very valid and very fair take. I don't think it's naive at all.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I think like also what I mean when I say that is not like these choices you make will always mean that you win versus you'd lose, but it's more like a mindset shift that like your high school debate career will be over before you know it, and your college debate career will be over before you know it. Just take those risks, take those choices, but don't have these regrets or like fleeting feelings about like if I would have said this, it would have gone better, because it really hurts the coaches most of all, right? Like people like you who tell them to say these things, they're too scared to say it. That's like something that nobody wants to hear after the round.
yeah, you should be trying to win. Yeah, yeah, Caden. Any thoughts on?
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you got?
I mean, this is absolutely true, and I think that the thing that the essence that people can take away from me and Danush's mentality was very centered around this sort of gamification of debate and how to get directly at that win condition. And I think one of the things that would be like my controversial opinion to answer the original question is I don't think that small schools should disclose if you're not going to get punished for it. And we've got some interesting strategies around this where, like, just to think about what theory is as like a concept, right? Like, in the terms of the game, theory is like a rule norm that gets enforced in the round because the judge votes against you if you don't do it. Uh, so, me and Danush at Nationals, and I just take pride in this because it's just like we played the game, as winningly as we could, was if we knew we got the judge pairing and we knew that the judges were not going to vote on a theory, like a disclosure theory argument, I was not sending the case to the other big school before the round. I don't care. And we had funny, controversial stories about that where people got upset with us. But I think that that is like the essence of the game, and you have to put like winning before some sense of honor because it's all sort of a two-faced game, like this honor thing that people do. I don't really see what it's rooted in. People will use it against you whenever they can, and it all ends up being part of this like game where people are just trying to beat you. Uh, and I think if you're a small school, you should take every advantage you can by taking evidence off of other people's wikis and not disclosing if you're not going to lose to theory.
So the community college circuit has its own national championship, and it's a full service tournament. So there's speech and debate at it, and
Mhm.
you'll have speech coaches judge debates all the time, right? And that's sort of like where our school DVC, you'd compete against four-year schools that did national circuit debate, but then also you would go to these competitions where it was like much more like a UIL situation. And there's these speech coaches who would judge our rounds who are friends of mine. They're friends of mine, and I think they're great. I'm not going to say their name here, but I think they're wonderful people, and I think they're great coaches, and I'm a big fan. But you go into a parley round, and their philosophy just says, "I hate topicality. I'll never vote on it." And I was like, "Word." I hope the other side is topical, and then our kids will come back, and I'll be like, "What happened?" And and they'll be like, "Yeah, they weren't topical." I was like, "So what'd you do?" And they'll go, "We read two topicalities." And I was like, "That's the worst thing you could have done." I get that they weren't topical, so you did the thing you're supposed to do, but they said they're not going to vote on it. They hate topicality. You read it twice, so at the end of the day, I think it's interesting because in other sports, like a judge can be wrong, right? Like that concept exists like in gymnastics where they're like supposed to evaluate things under a certain way. And debate is really interesting because for a variety of reasons, we've sort of left all of the refereeing of the debate to the debaters in the round. But essentially, what that has done is like no format of debate that I'm aware of explains like why the winner wins. Like
Mhm.
they say the judge picks a winner, but there's no rule that says the judge needs to pick the winner based on X, Y, and Z, right? And so the only way a judge decision can be wrong is literally if they typed in the wrong name or like checked the
Mhm.
wrong box, right? But in a world where any decision a judge makes is valid, then anything you can do to get that person to vote for you, like that's the game, right?
Yep.
And I think there's a lot of discourse and debate around like bad judges, but there's no actual like I think these are inherent problems when the round is just left to some judge and somebody in a room, right? And I think you're totally right. Like it's just some judge, it's somebody in a room, they're not going to vote you down for not disclosing, so there's like no actual structural reason to disclose. Fair. I am trying to remember the last question. Oh, yeah, this is an interesting one. Um, Especially because Kaden, you didn't necessarily start off as a freshman, and Danush, you also as a sophomore started getting more heavily into things. But let's say you were starting over as freshmen in high school, and you had to speed run to getting as good at debate as you were at your peak. Which Danush might have been yesterday. I don't know. But you're trying to speed run to like getting as good as possible, as quickly as possible. What would you do? Like how would you get good at debate most efficiently now?
I this question is different for debate in general versus how would you get as good as possible at policy debate. So I think I'll answer for policy debate because I think I dove a little more head on into the prep for that, and I'll leave the second question, if you don't mind, to Danush, just like debate as a skill. Um, for getting best at policy debate, I think the number one thing you should do is always read the wiki, right? Like open case list wiki is a thing that high school policy debaters and college debaters constantly update, especially the big schools because they usually adhere to the norm of disclosing. And I think that after tournaments, like you'll eventually start to learn when the big tournaments are, after each one of those tournaments, I think you should look through those arguments that they've made and try to like start looking through sort of the meta for what good evidence is being read, all that stuff. I think to take it a little bit of a step back, because I think that's honestly too far ahead. Um, I would get involved if you are, and I'm going to assume this is from sort of our perspective, you aren't engrossed in a community of coaches and all that stuff. You should get on the internet. You should get on Reddit communities, you should get on Discord communities, because these people aren't necessarily going to be the most intelligent debaters in the world. There are very good debaters in these communities. Uh, but they're just going to be talking about these things all the time. And you need to engross yourself in these conversations, even if people are wrong, because there is no objective truth. It's the fact that you're talking about it, right? And you need to get yourself in a position where you're talking and thinking with other people about these things. And you're going to get yourself involved in like prep groups and stuff, like even if it's not, with a bunch of coaches and they're producing the most intelligent stuff. Danush and I, for years, for a year, were invested in like prep groups with other PFers and stuff, and they were cutting cards that were like green, yellow, and orange, and they were all awful. And it was the fact that we were just doing it all together and talking about stuff that just sort of helped us rise to start to understand arguments. And then you can go look at the wiki and see, oh, this big school is reading this argument. Oh, that's intelligent. Let's take it and let's start compiling our own group of stuff. And alongside that, I would just recommend searching for all the videos that you can find on the internet for college policy debaters, and just trying to watch them, because you aren't going to understand it at first. You are going to physically watch the round, and I got through hour and a half long rounds that I just like ended, and I was like, I have no idea. I did the same thing with Proteus videos. Like I remember you watched an LD video one time of this, the guy who was Batman against, there was some queer pesque, and
Yeah.
I watched that entire video probably 3 times over, and I was like, I don't know what argument just happened. But I kept watching it over and over again until you will start to understand these concepts. And I think that's all you can do is exposure. Just like time and exposure make you better at things. And that will always be true for football. That will be true for any sport, any activity, especially debate, where it's like you just need exposure to arguments, and that will make you better.
That's a great answer. Danush, what are your thoughts?
I guess I can give the cynical answer first and then like the
Yeah.
realistic practical advice. The reality is like if you really want to get good at debate and you have, I guess we're doing like the any percent speed run, so like you can use
Yeah.
any hacks or cheats or whatever. You should just pay the thousands of dollars that it costs to go to the tuition at these really, really large debate schools that are often private academies. You should enroll there. And that's probably I would probably be significantly better than I am today if that's what I did. Right. So I think that ultimately that's the easiest way to do it. But from a practical perspective, I don't think that advice is actionable for most people, right?
Yeah.
Because if I was me in ninth grade or eighth grade, I would have done that, right? Because I know now that would have become my life, would have become obsessed with it. But for folks who are like, I guess they're like, how do you get good now? I think that everything Kaden said is correct. Also, you might not want to choose these prep intensive events, right? So ultimately, the reality is there's a skill ceiling for every event. The policy debate skill ceiling is significantly higher than every other event because it exists in college. And we can see that, right? We can see that the worst college debaters are so much better than the best high school debaters in a sense, right? So if that's the case, I think that skill ceiling is drastically reduced in events like congressional debate, extemporaneous speaking, public forum, right? I don't mean to insult the people that are in these events, but it's going to be easier to improve faster in these events. And like there's evidence that proves this. Like for example, younger students often do just as good as older students in some of these debate events. That often never happens in policy debate. The people who win the TOC are often always seniors, right? So I think that choosing events that are less prep intensive, but the main thing I think is the most important is to talk to good debaters, like Kaden said, talking to someone that is better than you at debate and finding a resource in your community or even online, someone who knows more about debate and is willing to teach you, because so many folks are not willing to teach you, right? If you can just ask somebody questions, bounce around questions, you will get progressively faster. You'll progress at a much faster rate. I think the reason why me and Kaden even have to seek out Discord or Reddit in the first place is because usually that person is a coach. But for people who do not have coaches, you need to find some resource that acts like a coach for you. And a Proteus video is great, but obviously Sasan can't like come out of the screen and answer the questions you have. I know he tries to in the comments, but I think that it's best to just find a resource in your community and just talk to them.
That's awesome, guys. A fun fact that did pop into my mind as you were saying that, though, is I think there's one exception to an event that is done in college and in high school, and high schoolers are better than college competitors, and that's extemp.
Mm.
The average high school extemper would crush the average college extemper. I mean, college extempers, I mean, they're on note cards, like their level of analysis just isn't as good, the delivery's not as clean. And I think the reason why is the same reason why these people are doing extemp in the first place, is because extemp is the most efficient event to do if you want to get really good at something practical and useful and then go off and do something else. Very few of those people are then doing extemp in college. This is this is a weird question to leave on, but it's something that just popped into my head about this, which is sort of this dynamic between college and high school policy. To what degree do you feel like the meta for high school policy just follows the meta for like to what degree do you feel like that, like, innovation, I guess, is a strong word, right? But like,
Mhm.
but are teams in, to what degree are teams in high school just copying teams in college in policy?
On the national circuit, almost 1 to 1. At especially at tournaments like the Tournament of Champions, which is by far the most like progressive sort of pinnacle of Nat circuit success. It's almost 1 to 1 for a couple reasons. One, because the schools that tend to be successful, those high prep schools, have a lot of college debaters who are coming to them and sort of instilling their views upon them, which passes it down in one way. And second is because, they pass down their files, they pass down their arguments. And second is this weird timing dynamic that just happens to happen where the national debate tournament is right before the TOC. So all of these schools
Oh,
in college that have just prepared a bunch of weird arguments and files and things that they've gotten together, like basically made the best versions of their argument for the end of the year, will then pass unbroken files and stuff down to high schoolers to let them read at the TOC, which effectively just creates this weird pipeline where it's like the leftovers of college are flowing into high school.
and people
And
are reading
yeah,
it with 1 week of having seen the files, right?
yeah,
So that's not, it's
yeah.
not at the same, you know.
Yeah, it's
But
just
no,
sort of
that
like the follow behind of college.
that's really interesting. And also, Danush, I do want to hear your thoughts on this, but it also occurs to me that no other event that is in both high school, in debate, that is in both high school and college, is as similar. Like Parley in high school isn't the same as NPDA, and NFALD in college isn't the same as, I mean, even just functionally and how they work. Like college LD is one topic all year long, right? And yeah, I guess it makes sense that in policy also, with a lot of like theory and K being more like specific, the evidence isn't as topic reliant, and so it can be used in high school more than like high
Hmm.
school OD. But Danush, what are your thoughts? Like, generally the same, that like the that essentially like that college policy sort of just like the fifth through eighth year of doing debate, and it's just sort of one continuous thing, or that like high school kind of has some of its own meta or anything like that, you know?
I guess, Sasan, have you ever heard of the term called DocBot?
No.
Okay, so in the policy debate community, these are the folks that me and Kaden hate the most, but they're very prevalent, and it's basically an insult. We call them doc bots because they're literally just like robots that just read off speech documents, right? So the
Mm.
coach will write them like blocks up to the last speech, and the entire debate is just an hour and 30 minutes of you reading this script, and then whenever me and Kaden say something, you have a script response to that script, and then it just keeps going, right? So I think that that's a real prevalent thing in the policy debate community. Again, the conversation I had like very much at the beginning of this conversation, which was the idea of like communication and communication not being the focus of policy debate, means that doc bots can do really, really well, right? Folks that literally just do that every single debate. Because like, okay, but let's say like I have like, I don't know, like I'm like 80% as good as Michael Jordan. I'm going to crush everybody at basketball, right? It doesn't actually matter that I'm not Michael Jordan, right? And so these doc bots get really good at like imitating almost everything that the person who wrote the blocks does. And it's like, I can debate you and I can debate Sasan and I can debate Kaden, but if we all played basketball and then Michael Jordan's like phone shows up, we're all getting crushed. So I think that that's a good way to like explain why the meta is so similar. Is that this idea of like everything being prepped down does allow students to almost imitate or mimic to a T, whereas in like other events it'd be really hard to do the same thing.
Yeah.
That here's a
And
funny thought, right?
the person writing those blocks is almost always a college debater for a lot of these schools. Yeah.
But isn't the DocBot just doing whatever they can to win?
They are, right? And that's why we can't fault them. Is right. Like
You're
we don't
like, it's like
necessarily
a
like it, but they are doing it, right? And like we to an extent, like I gave 2 and Rs that were like the CapK, and I had 2 and R blocks for the CapK. Um, and I think that there is the reason that we do enjoy like sort of learning how to make these arguments off the top of your head is I truly do believe it makes you better at winning. As when you can really truly contextualize something, judges, regardless of whether or not it actually like logically makes the outcome of the debate different, judges in policy are not quite as technical as they like to think they would be. And if you are really deeply contextualizing something, it makes them feel more comfortable voting for an argument that you've supported because it just feels like it has more like meat on the bone. So I think that's why that's beneficial and why sort of being a docbot in Danush's phrasing has a ceiling to it. But I mean, I can't fault people for doing something that's best for winning.
you guys. It's been a lot of fun talking to you. Really appreciate. I don't think we've had somebody on talking about policy, and it's really a great opportunity for me to sort of like. I mean, I know you guys weren't like you were in the national circuit, but like it's valuable and really interesting to hear the perspective of somebody who's in that circuit, but isn't necessarily the person who like won TOC and doesn't have those resources. I think partly because that's what our channel is here to sort of try to like bridge the equity gap of, and secondly because I feel like I have more to ask and more to say. And this was a really fun conversation. Is there anything either of you want to add before we close up?
I mean, I think one of the things that sort of helped us in that transition, we mentioned Josh, we mentioned sort of figuring it out, but like videos on the internet like Proteus change everything for people who don't have coaches, right? Like I did not know the structure of advantages and disadvantages before watching you and Paul talk about it. Like these kinds of things that I didn't mention in my how to speedrun getting better debate, looking for videos like this and everything that you do is really incredible at helping people bridge that gap and sort of get on a path to success. So thank you for helping us sort of get along this path, Susan.
That really means a lot, Kaden. Thank you. Thank you. Danush, is there anything you want to say before we close?
Yeah, I think I'll echo something similar and add one more thing. These conversations that me and Kaden and you are having would not be possible without Proteus. Like we can't talk about debate like this without learning the basics. And I think that not even the basics, but even like further than that is only possible with like online resources. Also, if folks look up my name on Tabroom, my email is on there. And if they want to have conversations about asking debate questions, saying anything about debate, if they want to have a coach, someone like that, some kind of resource, they can reach out to me. I'm not doing college policy, so I'll probably have more free time. I'll be just as lazy as I was in college as I was in high school. So I think that we can say all these things, but being a real resource is important. So folks can always reach out to me with questions. I can even say my email. It's just my name, my first name, Danush, ftw@gmail.com. So folks can reach out to me and ask questions. And I think that I'll welcome all of those questions is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, same thing goes for me. I'm totally open to questions and all that, either through tab or we can put those in the description or something. But yeah.
Yeah. I'll put it in the pinned comment at the top. Hey, this was a long interview. I appreciate you guys giving me so much of your time, and best of luck in everything that you have coming up. I hope UT Tyler
Austin for
Austin
both of us, yeah.
UT Austin. I hope it treats you both really well. Take care.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem.